hello, 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 hello. It's good to see you. Say hello.
Welcome to the Huskies Hockey Podcast, your eulogy as we remember the season. I was going to say fondly, but that's not the right word. We'll reminisce about the season and kind of talk about the big elephant in the room, the big question mark, and that's to dust off my Latin. It's Quo Vadimus. So where are we going? What does it mean for the program, and what does it mean for just how the season unfolded, how it ended as the Huskies lost to Western Michigan, got swept 6-2 because there's no other score that we can lose at Lawson other than 6-2. Which Andrew, I think you pointed that out. How many times have we lost?
Yeah, the official keeper of that stat, I guess. Sixth time, just this decade since 2020. Out of 12 total games, six of them have been won by Western Michigan by the exact score of 6-2. And we've had some near misses too, because we saw the last series was a 6-1 win for Western. Yeah. Another 4-0 win. I mean, long story short, St. Cloud's won 2 of those 12 games. The 10 games that Western has won have been nearly all of them routes, like we saw this weekend.
Yeah. So let's go ahead and recap. But I don't really have a lot to talk about this series in general. Really, just both games. We just kind of looked meandering. I mean, even we were just the penalty trouble that we were in. Some warranted, some not warranted, but at the same time, it was just all around frustrating on both ends of the ice. And I think it's a fitting way to end this season with how magnificently everything just went out in a crash and burn. I think this series just kind of spreads it all up in a nutshell.
Yeah, not terribly competitive. It played out how a 1-8 playoff matchup sort of is expected to play out. Yep. St. Cloud has had their trouble in the past as a 1 seed in these first round matchups against Miami all 3 times. Lost the first series in that 1-8 matchup. Had to take them to 3 games in 2018, and then finally took care of business with a relatively easy sweep with them in 2019. But this one was, as we've mentioned, just kind of by the book, how just to take care of business kind of weekend from Western Michigan standpoint. They were able to look good, able to pad their stats. Slukinski, their goaltender, who's sort of been anointed as their playoff starter. I mean, he got the start every game. Basically, up until 3-4 weeks ago, they were splitting duty, him and Cameron Rowe, 1 game each weekend. But for the last month now, Slukinski's taken the reins and gotten every start, and that seems to be the plan. I would imagine that's the plan going forward to this weekend at the Target Center for them. And he looked good. Doesn't look like a freshman who's not experienced or can't handle the situation. A weekend that if you're a Broncos fan, you're thinking, okay, kind of forget about this. Easy peasy. Now bring on the real competition.
Yep. I don't know if you had a little bit of a Freudian slip from a future segment that we're going to have, but the XL Energy Center, not the Target Center.
Did I say the Target Center? God.
Said the Target Center, which was
my bad.
A couple conference tournaments there at the Target Center. So I thought you were going to go down memory lane with me. as this is the last conference tournament.
Yeah, we'll get to that. We'll get to the memory lane segment.
We'll definitely get to that because I've got some highs, I've got some lows that tournament, but all great memories. So, but back to this weekend. Again, I just felt it was our passing. It just didn't look like we were on the same page. It looks like we didn't have a lot of hope out on the ice, and I just felt like the players were just, I don't know, like dejected maybe a little bit. And it's just like I think obviously with everything gone how it did go, they're obviously disappointed as well. But both games, as Western Michigan was able to come out to a fairly comfortable lead, it was just like there's not much we can do here going out. So season ends, and that's I don't really know much more I can say about this weekend. That's it. It is what it is. We had the seniors as our Saltquist, Ports, Falk, Enright, and then Lidkey as well, as they played their last game in a Huskies uniform. Wish them all the best in their future and what they're doing. But yeah, it's just the season. One of the weird things, and one of the things I always kind of go back to, that 03-04 season. There was a lot of similarities. That team at least could put some scores, put some points up on the board. This team just had a little bit of trouble. And that's, I think, the biggest surprising is what happened to our goal scoring all throughout the season. It felt like we couldn't score off sustained zone time. We couldn't score off the rush. Everything just dried up, and I gotta, I guess, tip my hat to McMahon at the beginning. And I remember talking about this too, where he said, how is this team going to score? And I was like, what do you mean how we're going to score? We've got goal scorers. And turns out he was right.
Yeah, I want to get to that. I had some questions for you about the games. I feel like we should probably put a little bit more, not that we really want to revisit this past weekend too vividly, because it was one to forget, that's for sure. But you mentioned the penalties, and like Saturday, 4 penalties, I think, in the first 7 minutes and change for the Huskies. I mean, that put them in the early hole. Werner, who's a guy that doesn't really see the box. I mean, his brother literally never saw the box when he was with the Huskies for his entire NCAA career. Werner, not as well behaved, but it's hard to be that well behaved. But taking 3 penalties on Friday's game, scoring a goal like he's, for some reason, like he turned into Rick Tocchet on Friday, which is not something I was expecting. I feel like, and we saw Caleb Thiessen getting...
What a pull, Rick Tocchet.
I mean, he's the answer to a good trivia question. He's got the most Gordie Howe hat tricks in NHL history. Goal, assist, and fight. Gordie Howe only had 2 of those in his career, fun fact. Tocchet had like 17 or 18. And he holds the record. Probably will... Well, who knows? I mean, fighting's kind of on the decline, so perhaps that's a record like the DiMaggio hitting streak. Is anyone going to touch that?
Is it untouchable?
But didn't see that out of Werner. But I mentioned with Thiessen getting both games, I wonder if this was a concerted game plan for Larson to sort of bring the physicality this weekend. I should say I thought some of the calls, especially on Saturday, are pretty weak. Lifting sticks that were being called for penalties, which I didn't really agree with. And so, but I feel like there was a concerted effort to bring some more physicality because, as we mentioned last week, if you're going to win games against this team, it's going to be in the 2-1 kind of variety. Getting into a boat race with this team was never a good idea. As it turns out, that physicality led to some penalties, which led to a very potent power play for Western, converting, kind of burying the team early on Friday. And then Saturday, just that one goal on the power play, that the only goal in the game, till halfway through the second period or so. Certainly didn't see a 6-2 game develop at that point in the game, but just something that the team, the Huskies were just outmatched this weekend. I think that's how it kind of played out. If the physicality was intentional or if it was just an organic response to a team that just couldn't keep up with a more skilled team on their home ice in Western Michigan. Anyway, you chalk it up sort of a going out with a whimper, not a bang for this season. And I did see some chatter thinking that perhaps some of the calls, this is like a rigged situation. I don't really understand the benefit of rigging it towards Western. And what's the kind of the, I think it's called Hanlon's razor. Never attribute to malice what can be more easily explained by incompetence. These are just bad officials. We know that. We've got a lot of experience and a lot of data to support that rationale for bad officiating. And can we, if they are such bad officials, we can't trust them to pull off a conspiracy in which they are calling the game one-sided in favor of Western Michigan at this point. The easier solution here is that, the refs aren't very good, but also St. Cloud is not as good as Western Michigan. I don't think that had any effect on the outcomes of the game, but I can get it. It's the end of the season. It's been especially a second half that spiraled out so far out of control, wondering reasons why it got this bad. And we'll be doing a full post-mortem of this team, not today, but kind of throughout the next couple of shows. I'm sure we'll return to not only what happened this year, what went wrong this year, but then obviously the follow-up would be, how does this team rebound going into next season? And the moves that will happen here in a fairly short amount of time here. Portal sort of dictates a window of movement, both in and out. We'll be on top of that because I think this is going to be a very, very important offseason for this team. Perhaps the most important offseason in this program's history, if you consider these new school dynamics, not just with the portal, but with like the house settlement, which deals with nil money, which we haven't heard St. Cloud's official commitment on that yet. We can get to that maybe in another show. But dissecting what went wrong this season is probably more what we're going to focus on this week. And you brought it up, offense. I think overall you can say pretty much every facet of the game underperformed for this team this year, with the potential exception of goaltending. However, I'll point out that during Pasch's absence, goaltending was also an issue. Particularly even the 11-game winless streak. Pasch contributed the last 2 games to that streak. So even he wasn't immune to the team's misfortunes during that program, the history-setting run of futility for this team in the second half of the season. But not just offense. Defense let you down for the majority of this season. I think we can chalk that up as a unit that needs improvement. Special teams, I think from both power play and penalty kill, needs improvement. We've talked about coaching decisions this year. That was not a great year for the coaches. And offense, I think, takes the cake out of all of these areas of the game. This was the worst season, statistically speaking. It's the fewest goals. Just the facts here. Fewest goals scored in Huskies hockey history, and by a long shot. 79 goals this year total. There's only been one more year in St. Cloud's D1 history, which dates back to 87, where the Huskies didn't score 100 goals. And that was the 2019-2020 season, which was cut short by COVID. Interestingly, they were scheduled to play in Kalamazoo against Western Michigan that weekend before it was canceled. So that team played 34 games this team played 36. So, I mean, it's possible that team could have cracked 100. But even to put that into context, that 2021 season, this year where St. Cloud was the runner-up in the national tournament, they only played 31 games that year, and the Huskies cracked 100 that year. So even a season where they played significantly fewer amount of games than they did this year, every other season they've scored more goals than this, and the bare minimum 15 goals more than what they scored this season. So that's like underlined and circled in red. How did it get that bad? Because that's shocking. Even I think if McMahon, it's not like he's a close follower of the Huskies, but he had his thumb on the scale somehow and felt like Huskies lost a lot of their scoring over the offseason this year and was skeptical that they were able to replace that scoring. And he was definitely right. Where did it go wrong? Obviously, you'd like to think that Ingram stands out. We had this last year as well with Okabe kind of laying an egg in his last year as a Husky. Ingram, though, his performance, I mean, Okabe still had 20-plus points this year. We're looking at Ingram with an 8-point scoring line on the entire season, which, yes, he had some injuries. He played 29 games officially. And we've kind of debated whether or not there's been some injury concerns that have gone a long way to explain that 8-point production throughout the season. Perhaps we'll get some more clarification sort of in the aftermath of the season. But you can start there as being a big culprit of missing offense. But even if you put, let's say 15 goals on his mark instead of 2, you're still not cracking that century mark of goals, like I mentioned, that St. Cloud's been able to put up on every other year in their program history except this one, and one other COVID-shortened season. What else went wrong here? Is it Ingram? Is it those bottom 2 lines? We saw Barrett Hall was injured this weekend. He was out for one of the games, and last weekend as well. I mean, there's been some nagging injuries with some of the guys. What else do you you look at this offense and who are you pointing to as far as it's either underproduction or just the roster wasn't built out correctly? What are you thinking about this offense?
Yeah, it's, and that's kind of the big question. When I looked at the beginning of the year and I was looking for people to really kind of take that next step. And I was really looking forward to some of the people like, obviously I was excited for Ingram's season, but I was expecting, Gavin Thorson to be a little more impact as a freshman. Now I feel like it kind of clicked into place later in the season. So, I think that is a bright spot there. I don't want to harp on Ingram too much because I think that's well documented, but obviously that was a big blow. I think the biggest thing is, and it's the comment that you said a couple shows ago when you were talking about how we fell in love, or Larson fell in love with that Will Hammer type of role. And I just it's the depth. And I think, some of the best runs of the Huskies hockey that we've had that third line that's able to produce at a fairly solid clip. And it's just, we didn't have that this year. And I was really looking forward for Ryman to taking that step. And nothing ever really came of Ryman doing it. Solquist was someone who I was really, I thought at the end of last year, I was like, hey, I actually thought he was a really solid player. I thought he really regressed again this season. And then I didn't think, after Lidke and Wiley on the back end, everything just kind of fell off as long as your name's not Bernovic. And that's where it was really tough. Gross, we kind of saw flashes of, but I don't think he was the most consistent. Ashawn, I think, again, played a role, but as far as he's not going to be one to put the points on the board. So it's that, I worry about, things can change so quickly when it comes to hockey now with the portal and everything that goes along with it. But, I don't know if I can look at this place as a good destination for a top goal scorer who is looking for a change of pace. And I think, that's going to be a very hard sell for Larson to do coming up. And I think to plug some of those in, or, it kind of makes me a little bit worried here for next season where we're at. Now, I don't think this is going to be a long-term thing. I think we're going to be able to kind of bounce back and, maybe not next year, but the year after, because I do like, like I said, Thorson, obviously Bernovic will probably have for another year, maybe two. And then I've, Werner, I think, was solid, and Gardner, I think he can continue to get better. I didn't mind him as the season went on. But it's, and then who knows with Jack Rogers and his injury, and what he can add. I'd like to see him actually finally, blossom out. So, and that's where I'm kind of looking at is just the sum of its parts, and the depth wasn't there to survive in the NCHC. And, we can go back to how many series that we played where, it wasn't necessarily the top people that burned us, but it was those third liners that you've never heard of. And of course, they're the ones scoring goal. And that's what you need to survive in this league. And just whereas on the women's side, we didn't have the dual scorers on the top end. On here, I didn't think we had the goal scorers there on the bottom end. And it just, that's kind of where everything fizzled out.
Yeah, kind of looking here, it's like, you mentioned Sahlquist. He goes from 19 points last year to 7 this season. Odd career. 3 of his 4 years, he got exactly 3 goals, 4 assists, and 7 points. And then that one outlier in 23-24, he puts up the 19-point mark for the season. But so he dips by 12. And Ingram goes from 28 to 8. It's a huge, steep drop. Litke, sort of under the radar, goes from 17 to 8. So cutting his production in half. Again, obviously defensemen, we don't really count on them necessarily for offense. They're titled, their position is defense, but especially considering how much offense this team has gotten from its point men in recent years. You go from Anhorn, 30-point year last year, Litke 17 points. He had Peart put up 20-point season 2 years ago, 15-plus point season last year. You didn't get any. Litke, Ralph, and Zinger all get 8 points, and Wiley. They all tied for the point lead among defensemen at 8. Zinger, you can mention him too, as far as the less offense than we expected, goes from 20 points at Northern Michigan, CCHA. Obviously, there is going to be a difference there going into a tougher league, the NCHC, but just 8 points in comparison to his 20-point output last season. So you could put that. You mentioned like those bottom 6. You just didn't get any offense consistently out of those two lines. However, rearranged the personnel was. However, you arranged the deck chairs, and the Titanic which was the bottom 6 this year. For a lot of the season, it was Rosborough, Ashan, and Ryman on that fourth line. Ashan, 11 points. Ryman, 4. Rosborough, 1 point. The first game of the year, scores the goal, the only goal of the game, in the 1-0 win at St. Thomas, and he goes an over for the entirety of the rest of the season.
And that was a tip, right?
It was a tip from a Colin Ralph shot. So that is entirety of the offense, and we've mentioned too his like exceptionally bad face-off percentage as well. So what is that? 16 points combined throughout that league this year. And they were together for 25 plus games as a line this year. We saw for maybe a third of the season at least, Sahlquist, Ports, and Ingram, 20 points combined with those three players. Thorson, I think we can agree we were expecting more than 10 points this season. I don't know what we would have. Obviously, it's easy to say what we would have thought at the beginning of the season. But considering guys like Gross and Yetnin got 20 points in their freshman year last year, thinking that Thorson's a higher rated prospect coming in as a freshman than those two guys were, somewhere in the 20-point range is probably what we were expecting realistically from Thorson this year. So by any metric, I think that was an underwhelming freshman season. We've talked a lot about Thorson this year, and we share optimism that he is gonna. I think he ended the season more so on a higher note, and we hope to see that improvement continue into next year. Still waiting for that 40-point season out of Jack Rogers, as Go Huskies Woo has put on the record. He's at 15 through his first 3 seasons. He's got that extra year. This year didn't count to the NCAA's eyes, so he's got 2 more years of eligibility, and so maybe we can finally get that 40-point season that we've been promised from Go Huskies Woo. But yeah, I mean, 28 points from Burnwick leads the team. We've gone through years past here of Huskies history. Those stand out when you don't have a 30-plus point score. Even a guy approaching a point per game. That's a big red flag for an offense that's struggling and letting you down. And so offense being in particular, I think the key area that needs to be improved. And I agree with your assessment that portal acquisitions, based on the numbers that we've just gone over here, as far as from an outsider's perspective, is this a system that is attractive to players who are looking to rebound, maybe to turn around their fortunes? Is this a system that other players want to step into? Perhaps this year is just a blip, because if you look at just even Larson's back history with the Huskies, this is an outlier among those seasons as much as is an outlier among all Husky seasons in their D1 era. So you can chalk that up to it was just this year and the personnel that they had, and perhaps it's not going to affect anything going forward in terms of attracting not just players out of the portal, but recruits in general. We'll see. But I have skepticism about that, as you mentioned, and I have skepticism about some of the players that we mentioned here maybe wanting to look at that same system and saying, I could do better elsewhere. That's something that we're going to have to keep an eye on the next month to 2 months when the portal opens in earnest in a week or so. And that portal will be open for 2 months. So thinking like from next week until mid-May, we'll know a lot of the answers to the questions that we've had here. Just as far as not so much names, but how many guys enter the portal from the guys that we've just mentioned, just the roster in general, and how many guys does St. Cloud land in the portal? Those are big unknowns. And as far as like making any early predictions about next year, I'm going to defer all of that, because I can't make that reasonable prediction without knowing how the outcome of portal movement will go. But I think this was a good exercise to go over the problem as far as you need to score more goals. You need to score like 20 to 25 more goals minimum to put you in a position where you're even sniffing pairwise position. So offense, and again, we'll preview this in weeks to come as well, but it's not just the portal, obviously, that you're getting talent from. You've got recruits. And of the forwards coming in, Nolan Rhodes seems to be the highest build prospect coming in, tearing up these USHL this year. White Bear Lake commit. You might recognize the name Roed. His brother Leighton played at Bemidji for a couple of years. Good career there. Good hockey name. And so he headlines the forward class coming into this year. Now, it's hit or miss. We were singing the same praises about Gavin Thorsen's excellent USHL season that he had last year. And we saw what that produced as a freshman this year. Obviously different players, player types, whatnot, but we do have some players coming in, and we'll preview not just Road, but the others that are expected to come in as freshmen this year. But I think just relying on the incoming freshmen that you've recruited isn't going to be enough. I do think that a portal acquisition or 2 or 3 is going to be needed to shore up a historically bad offense. Am I wrong? Or what do you expect? I should put it that way.
Yeah. No, I definitely agree. I was just kind of going through some other freshmen and stats just for comparison. One of them that kind of stuck out to me would be, if I'm going to hop in the Wayback Machine and show my age to everyone, Dave Iannazzo, freshman season. 3 goals, 10 assists, 13 points.
Should have been what? 0102?
That's the other side of the coin. That is the 0102 season.
Which is a pretty good team.
And that was obviously Mark Hardigan's 37, 38, 75 and should have been Hobie Baker season. So, I kind of look and I kind of see a little bit of Iannazzo with Thorsen's game. So if that's the comparison that I was kind of drawn to, I like that first off. And like I said, 8 points since mid-January down the stretch, I think that's somebody who everything is kind of, he gets it, or he's starting to get it. So
showing improvement.
Yeah, exactly. But I think he hit it right with, also the coaching's inability or stubbornness. I don't know which one it is to make any types of changes to shuffle, some of when we're going through those, long stretches of nothingness with the bottom 6 and keep hammering them out there. It was troublesome to watch.
I will say they did experiment as the 11-game winless streak continued. It was almost to a point where no line was set in stone at that point. Even Bernovic and Hall were broken up. It got to a point where it was almost even too much experimentation, which I realize it's like we're like Goldilocks here. We can't get the right temperature. But that was that Duluth series up in Duluth to start the free fall, where I had sort of mentioned, ranted on Twitter, like this is the 6th or 8th straight game with the Sahlquist Ports and Thorsen. It was Thorsen was playing with them at that point. They had 1 point, 10 games or whatever it is. You can go back my tweets if you really want to be insane and fact checked what the exact numbers were. But it was almost like after that weekend, they were more apt to change lines around. Some of that was due to guys like Rosborough being injured, which, as I just mentioned, shuffling lines around Rosborough and keeping his line mates together. Like what was that in service of? A 1-point season for Rosborough? So yeah, I mean, that's on the record probably to an excess for some of our listeners, how much we criticize the coaching staff for their at times unwillingness to tinker with things. We've had a lot to say about the coaches this year, and not all of it very glowing. We should say. I mean, to good. I'll defend ourselves to do that. I mean, this was the worst season. If we want to just spin or take a step back just from looking at offense, I mean, this was the worst season in Huskies history in 20 years. 20 losses for the first time since the 04-05 season. So 14-21-1 overall record. Haven't put in that bad of a season since Dahl's last year in 04-05. The leading scorer on that team was, by the way, Dave Iannazzo, who you just mentioned.
He was born to score.
Circle. He was born to score, and he's born to lead bad teams in scoring. At least in that instance. That says right there, we're kind of spoiled if we've gone 20 years in between 20 loss seasons. Motzko never had a 20 loss season in his run here, and this is Larson's first time reaching that dubious plateau. And just 6 times in program history in the D1 era, again, since 87, that they have lost more than 20 games in a season. And I was kind of doing that research as far as worst teams in the D1 era. I think the number one worst team has to be that first year, 87-88. We mentioned that team too much this year because that was the team who this year's team broke that longest winless streak. That 87-88 team put in a 10-game winless streak. This year's team topped that by 1. But that year, just 11-25-1. That's the worst winning percentage for any Huskies team. Even some of the teams that lost 20 games in the 90s, we can look back. And that's why I don't want to make any bold statements here about ranking this team among the absolute worst. Because like the 95-96 team did not have a good record, 13-22-4, but that was the first year that Cullen and Parrish ran roster, the first of 2 years for each of those players. Their second year, they had a very good year. That first year, though, struggled. And even like the early 90s teams, you still had players like Satterdahlin and Haynes and Hedekin. I'm wondering if 20 years from now, we'll be able to look back on this team and say, hey, they were a bad team, but Bernovic, who's been a 10-year pro at the NHL level at that point. They couldn't have been that bad because they had a couple of NHLers on the team. It's hard for us we don't have a crystal ball here. We can't see how well these players' careers at the NCAA level and beyond will play out. But I don't know if you have any take on that as far as where you'd, at least maybe as far back as we go in our fandoms. I mean, I do remember that 04-05 season. It was my first year on campus. I can't say I went to many of those games, maybe a handful of them. You were a dog pounder that year before too. So did you go to all of those 04-05 games? And from my perspective, I still think this team has more talent than that 04-05 team did. So I wouldn't put this as the worst team in my time. I would still put that 04-05 team, which did have talent too. I mean, Joe Jensen had a decent career, had a cup of coffee in the NHL. Andrew Gordon was a freshman that year, decent career as a Husky. I mean, you had some, Casey Bohr, he's aight. You had some decent players on that team, but that team just seemed that it was similar in that there was just an unmatched quality with that team stacked up against everybody else. That was the year that all the Frozen Four was all WCHA teams. And you look at that team's schedule and their wins and losses that year, only one of their wins were against those 4 teams, CC, Denver, North Dakota, and Gophers. 14 games against those four teams combined, and just one win against those teams. So they're kind of beating up. Their wins were against, Yale and Princeton. They smoked those teams who, ECAC was terrible back then. They had a Sacred Heart series, which I'm sure you were torn at that time, right? Because you weren't yet a fan of those Pioneers, but kind of beat up on some bad teams, the Anchorages, the Michigan Techs, the world, but they couldn't really compete against the cream of the crop, which is similar to this year's Huskies team. Do you have any take on placing this team in the context of the history of the program?
There's some similarities there. In looking at that 04-05 team, what also kind of stuck out was we had like a goalie tandem at that time, and
that's like my first Husky argument was, do you like Montgomery or Boron? And I was a Boron guy. which I
and
probably wasn't
he got
right.
a majority of them.
That year he did. Well, Montgomery had more starts the year before, I believe. So he probably had a better overall career as a Husky, but for that year, I was like, I give it to Boron.
Yeah. So it was, and at that time too, scoring in general was just way up. And then you had the Huskies who, again, just had the inability to outside of Ianazzo and Jensen. And then also we had our first Mr. Hockey with Nate Day coming in, and we were excited for him to come in. And at that time,
kind of a Thorson, somewhat of a Thorson analog, really hyped high school player. Obviously you've got, I don't know if Nate Day would have played juniors like that, but we've still been the tail end of some guys like that who would have been with that sort of profile. Mr. Hockey winner might not have played juniors, or at least a full season of juniors. I'm not sure if that would have still been the case in 04 or 05, but at the very least, he was a very hyped prep player who, let's say, disappointed at the college level.
Yeah. And but at the same time, we had a lot of youth. And that's where like the whole, the defensive core in general was just young, which probably didn't help the aspect of the goals against average and the our inability to keep the puck out of the net. But we had people that turned into really solid defensemen. Justin Fletcher turned out to be a heck of a that Fletcher Clafton kind of pairing there. Bohr eventually had a really strong career there and on the back end, and it's so like it was one of those that was just kind of you had a little bit of a down year, and that sucks, but it was able to we were able to those players were able to get better under Dahl. And I know that's kind of the hot topic right now about, players, are they getting better under Larson? People can have their opinions one way or the other way. But I still think it's a little bit too early to tell, after just, one actual kind of class that's gone through for him. But we don't know where these players are going to end up, and the portal does throw in a whole new wrinkle in it. So it's I don't feel I don't think it's all doom and gloom for the program. And again, you're completely right with how spoiled we have been, that we haven't had these really down seasons. You can look back, and Duluth's had those 3 national titles, and they've been on a third year of a down season. They've had down seasons routinely. So things like that can change in college hockey. Blue Bloods also can have down years, and they're able to kind of pick back up. So it's, I think it's just kind of our turn, and I do feel like we've got the people in place, and I'm excited for what's going to come. And maybe I'm all sunshine and roses right now, but it's, I think that we do have some things that need addressing, that need fixing. Whether or not we're going to be the destination for people to do that, that's going to be up to the coaching staff to sell and the players to believe in.
Yeah, this is incredible. Looking at this 04-05 roster, this is eerie. So on that team, they had a guy who
was
transferred.
It their 12% power play?
I can't remember. Was that what their number was?
Yeah, they had a 12.2% power play.
I have this player. If his existence ever registered in my mind, it has long since been forgotten. But get this. So a new addition for that 04-05 team was a player they got as a transfer. Again, portal didn't exist, so this player had to sit out a season of transferring. But he transferred from a school in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, Michigan Tech in this case, listed as a forward/defenseman. That's weird. By the name of Josh Singer. Singer. Compared to Josh Singer, who's also played forward and defense when he was at Northern Michigan on the UP of Northern Michigan. Josh Singer in 20 games in 2004-2005, 4 goals, 4 assists, 8 points. Josh Zinger with a Z this year, 4 goals, 4 assists, 8 points.
Look at that.
The hockey gods are in accord, and that's weird, and I had to bring it up. So make of that what you will. But yeah, as far as the changes that need to be made, we'll be hashing over the action that does happen, analyzing what else should be done. But there's a lot. It's almost like reminds me of an old film review. Pauline Kael, New Yorker film critics, bashing the movie, saying it's not so much. She had a harder time thinking about what should stay in the movie rather than what should leave. So in this case, it's like I'm almost like, what do you keep of the recipe of this team? What are we sure about staying? Whether you want to say personnel or philosophy. I mean, there's certain guys I don't want to see Brnovik leave. We should mention, I think it's, at least for me, it became a little clear he's not so much a great two-way player. Led the team, put that in quotes, in plus minus, the worst plus minus, -15 on the season. We even saw and criticized Larson at the time for like not playing him in overtime sessions, which we thought was weird, but perhaps that sort of defensive liability played into those decisions. Brnovik's a good player. I would hate to see him leave, but it's not like he's this two-way great, defensive back checker plus forechecker. He's not a 5-tool player, as baseball scouts would say. But obviously a good player, one that I wouldn't like to see leave. Guys like Gross, I like. Obviously Isaac Posh would be a big loss if he were to either go pro or hit the portal. Obviously no rumors on that, but that would be a big loss. Obviously we like guys like Thorson. I like Colin Ralph as freshmen. These are the first years for those guys, and I saw enough that I'm intrigued for how they develop here in years to come. So I
also, same vein, Bufflin as well. I liked what I saw from him.
So, I mean, there's certainly individuals that we like, and you obviously only have a limited amount of time with all of these players. It's not like pros where you can hang on to these guys for decades plus if you want. Not decades plus, but you get what I mean. But as far as like, if we're trying to build a philosophy of the team, as far as we're trying to build a team that's going to be big and bruising and defensive minded, and we want to win 2-1 types games with those kind of Will Hammer grinder types being valuable cogs in a system. If that was the game plan, I think to an extent it was. We saw the limitations of that this year, or at least a margin for that to be successful. We saw that play out for the first half of the year, but then when he got a couple of key injuries, the bottom fell out in the second half. So instead of trying to, I'd like to see a focus towards 4 lines of, we're not going to get 4 lines of 80s Oilers type offense here, but we can't just have 2 lines of adequate offense and 2 lines of no offense. It's got to be a little bit more balanced from line 1 to line 4. So I'd like to see some more attention made to bottom 6 players, not just being kind of role players. I want to see skill more up to down on the roster from an offensive standpoint. That might be easier said than done, but I feel like part of the problem, aside from personnel, and then on top of that, injuries to that personnel, I think part of the reason was a game plan that was threading a needle that we saw kind of fall apart in the second half. So I'd like to see that change as well. And if that dictates kind of how they replace that personnel and how active they are going to be in the portal, I'm excited to see how that plays out. But yeah, a lot of uncertainty.
Yep, indeed. And we could start, kind of talking about players who expect to come in, but we're going to put a pin in that for now, and just kind of use this episode as a reflection, and then future episodes as we get into more news that's probably going to come out. I don't have any inside information, I should say that, but just in general, because of fast-paced times of college hockey is what it is. So let's go ahead and quickly switch topic because, as you yourself are topping off your frothy beverage, I can't believe I forgot.
So we're talking about whiskey today.
Whiskey.
How could you forget?
God, I forgot where I'm traveling.
I forgot for you too.
Yeah, and it was about 20 minutes in or so. I looked over and I have my little snifter here. I was like, and I can't drink it yet. So it's just sitting here taunting me like, hey, I'm right here. Don't you want to know what I taste like? And
the ice, well, you don't have ice. I was gonna say the ice had cracked to try to get your attention, but
right?
You drink it neat, so that joke wouldn't even work.
So, no, it's just the wallflower kind of sitting here in the corner. Like, don't you want to come talk to me? Like, what's going on here? So, before I officially kick off this segment, anything more about the season, or should we just?
I think drinking whiskey is the proper segue from talking about the 2024-2025 St. Cloud State Huskies.
Fair enough. Well, this is a very floral smell on the nose.
Where are we drinking?
We are drinking Austria.
Austria, not Australia. Have we done Australia?
We have done Australia, and that was a 7.9. I did check on that. So that one was really good. On the nose, I really like this, though. I have been to Austria. Fun fact.
I think we covered that in a couple of shows, or a couple shows ago.
My band
was that
trip.
your band trip?
It was. Yep. I kind of miss band, playing the trumpet. The trumpet. All right, here we go.
Well, on that note, is he going to trumpet the virtues of the Austrian whiskey?
I like how you said on that note. That was pretty punny there.
I didn't even try. That's how brilliant I am.
That's the puzzle brain in you that's able to just kind of lock that down. It's all right. So it's all right. That's kind of where we're at here. Quick shot at this, probably give it a 7.5.
Seems better than all right. Again, we've had one grade in the 8s. Correct?
Yep, and that was Ireland. So shocker there, I guess, really.
But this was up there with Australia, which was up there. So in the better half, let's say. Do these? I had a question. Do these? You're saying the country? Do they have? Are these brands of whiskey that you can get outside of this Costco pack, or do they just say the bottle just says like the country? Because if it was that, I would almost be skeptical that these were actually true and someone at Costco wasn't just pouring in Evan Williams to all these and just slapping them with different countries.
Just different They put some Skittles into some Evan Williams and to change the flavor just enough, like we did with Jolly Ranchers and Zima back in the day.
Talk about those 04-05 years.
That's Jolly Ranchers, Zima, and Southern Comfort. That's pretty much sums up college right there for me. Sadly, I think. Oh man! And then I had a bad run-in with Wild Turkey and Windsor. Windsor was that was vomited off the third floor of Benton Hall with that. So, but anyway, does Benton Hall even exist? I don't even know if Benton Hall exists.
One of the ones that they tore down.
Yeah. So that was like apartment living, but in a campus style.
Where was Benton Hall? Was that the one that was kind of by the hockey center? There was one that was my buddy was in that one. What
Shoemaker.
Was that one called? Shoemaker. No, not Shoemaker.
Am I not thinking of
Was
Benton
it Shoemaker?
Hall?
There was one that was right on that hill. Yeah, no, you're right. I'm getting Sherburne and Shoemaker confused. So yeah, Shoemaker is the one I'm thinking of. But where was Benton?
Benton Hall was like behind Shoemaker. Or not Shoemaker, behind Sherburne.
Okay. Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's because I was in Hill Case.
Sure.
And then behind that was Holes.
Yep, Stearns.
And then he had Sherburne. Mitchell. I had a couple friends in Mitchell.
I spent 2 years in the dorms in Mitchell.
Really?
I loved Mitchell. I was in the basement.
How many years? So how many years were you in the dorms? Because I was only in the dorms for 1 year.
3 years.
So Benton 1 year and then Mitchell 2 years.
Yep. Holes 1 year.
Okay. Oh, Benton, you weren't actually dorming.
I wasn't actually in there. I just had friends there.
Great guest.
Yeah, exactly. Off the third floor. If you want to know how many seconds it takes for that's
I bet a few St. Cloud State students have done that experiment.
Yep, exactly. So of Windsor. How much Windsor? So obviously I passed out there, and then the next morning there's just a blotch of dead grass right behind somebody's first floor balcony.
Some acidic stomach discharge.
Blame the Windsor. That's kind of what it so I couldn't touch whiskey for like a long time because of that.
It's kind of like me.
And then also the three, then I had a shot on my 22nd birthday. That was three wise men on a Mexican turkey hunt with a sunburn. And then that was
that doesn't ring a bell to me. It seems like tequila, whiskey, and something else.
So the three wise men, Jack, Jim, John, and then what? Jose.
I'm gonna do this after the show. I think we can do this.
Jack Daniels, Johnny Walker, Jim Beam, Jose Cuervo, Wild Turkey, and Tabasco sauce.
And
so
a partridge
three wise men on a
drink.
Mexican turkey hunt with a sunburn.
So one shot after the other, or we're mixing it all into one?
No, it was all mixed in
one shot or one drink.
They were like splashes, so it wasn't like a full pour. That would be.
I'm sure whoever served you was being very responsible.
Very
and not
responsible.
Over serving you.
Exactly. Nope. That was at the dugout, in case you were wondering. That's where I got served that.
No, that can't be.
They would never. They would never.
Very classy establishment.
So, all right. So as we got the tournament set up with all of the games played in the NCHC and the afternoon game, we have Denver moving on after their thrashing of CC in game 3. And they are playing Arizona State in the afternoon or the early game, and then Western Michigan and North Dakota are in the evening game. So from attendance wise, that is the one that probably works out the best. There's always kind of a weird shroud of secrecy about how it gets to pick and who gets and everything along those lines. But I believe Schlossman tweeted out that the commissioner does get final say, but they get input from everybody involved. I think there was previously where it said it was the host seed or the number one seed gets to pick where they want. I don't know. But in the end, that's how it all shakes out. And it is the last time that it's going to be at a neutral site at the XL Energy Center. And it makes sense considering what happened with college hockey and the attendance, the atmosphere in general, just kind of went by the wayside over the past. Really, you can say the shakeup with the departure of the Big Ten was kind of the catalyst. You can argue that it was going to happen in some way or another anyway, but in the end. It makes sense on why they're doing this. Dad and I have gone, since the 99-2000 season. That was at the Target Center, the Red Baron WCHA Final Five, and had a few sponsors even since then. It was Dodge for a while, but it was always a great time. A lot of memories that. Tournament has a lot of friends as well that we were able to meet up with, and it was always a fun time. So it's gonna be bittersweet also that I'm gonna see and the Huskies aren't going to be there, but I'm actually really excited in general because I think this is going to be a high scoring weekend of hockey. I think it's going to be entertaining, and it's something that I'm going to look forward to anyway. Do you have any initial thoughts about the Frozen Faceoff?
Yeah, I agree. It probably is time. It might, if anything, it might be a year or two late for wrapping up the XL's association with this format, just based on the last couple of years. Even games where North Dakota was involved, never came close to the numbers or the atmosphere in terms of what the WCHA version Final Five was. They gave it a good try, and as a conference that was, this is a very low bar, but it survived and was more successful longer than the Big Ten's neutral site version of this was, which really fell flat on its face after 2 years, maybe 3. I knew that with that one where it was at Joe Louis in Detroit, and there was less than 1,000 people there on one of those games. I think the conference bigwigs were really wiping egg off their face after that one, and certainly it never got to that level. But especially in the last, let's say, post-COVID years, it's depended on if you're cracked 10,000 at this tournament. It's going to depend on if North Dakota is there. And even if North Dakota is not there, or excuse me, even if North Dakota is playing in those games, like last year, they made it to the Frozen Faceoff and they were game against Omaha. Attendance, I'm just looking at 89-77. So it didn't even crack 9,000 last year. Now that was the afternoon game. We saw that they put North Dakota and Western Michigan in the night game. I would imagine if there was some input made for that decision, the last year's attendance number probably fed into that a little bit, with North Dakota getting the early game last year and that attendance figure that I just mentioned. I did look too, because I know they did this before. They generally had the 1 seed play the early game, but a couple of occasions they violated that. They had the 1 seed play the late game in 2017, and then 2014 as well. And both of those involved North Dakota as well. But North Dakota has played as the 1 seed. North Dakota played a couple of early games as well on Friday. So it wasn't like every year, if they were the 1 seed, that they would get the late game. There were some years where they where they played the early game too. But I don't think it's a huge difference. I mean, the rationale there was that the top seed gets the most rest. We'll get to this topic a little bit later. Coaches and commissioners are just crazy about extracting every bit of rest for their team, except when it becomes too much rest. Talk about a Goldilocks zone. We'll get to that in a future segment on today's show, but I don't think that's going to hurt Western, is who we protect in this case, I guess, is the 1 seed. But even if they win that game and play in the championship game on the 2 hours of less rest than they would have gotten than playing the early game, I don't think that's going to make a huge difference. As far as taking some picks, let's pick the games. Western versus North Dakota in that late game on Friday. You going
Western.
with Western Michigan?
Yep. And also, it just feels like North Dakota just hasn't had the success that they used to have in the final 5 days.
You could say that. You could say that again for all the North Dakota fans that are well aware of Bradbury's record when it comes to Frozen Faceoff. Never have won the Frozen Faceoff. After a pretty dominant stretch there at the WCHA Final 5, at least the last couple of those. And so you'll take Western. I mean, it's hard to bet against them. I mean, North Dakota.
I even just quickly pivot to a more grander sense. Do you feel like Western Michigan's a championship caliber team?
Of the NCHC Frozen Faceoff?
No. National tournament. Do you think that
we've argued this before? You're higher than them on them.
I am very high on them. Yes. And obviously this weekend is no different. Doesn't change my opinion at all. I'm wondering if it changed your opinion since you're like, no, it's Western.
It's not that they're Western. It's just that they haven't. I got flat from this from a Western fan this week, but they haven't beaten too many quality teams this year. And St. Cloud being the 8th seed and kicking their ass doesn't really change that equation much to me.
You really stirred the pot on Twitter as of late.
Am I? Maybe you're getting why I wasn't on it for 8 years. I was tweeting at Woden, so I started that. But again, we'll get to that. Western's a fine team, and again, the for me, who's NCAA is way too random, it's a roulette wheel. All you need to do is make the tournament. But I'm looking at like that Denver result this weekend, losing that first game against CC. Throughout this year, especially down the stretch here, I've said I look at Denver as more threatening to me than Western Michigan in the NCAAs, because I feel like Denver, yes, the last half of the year, we saw this when they lost to St. Cloud, for instance, kind of ho-hum. But my whole thing was they're conserving their energy to when they actually need it. And we saw this last weekend, CC wins on Friday. So CC needs to win these next 2 games. I mean, they're likely in the tournament anyway. But if they would have lost that series, they would have had to sweat it out this weekend. They wouldn't have been 100% certain to make the tournament. So because they won that series against CC, now they basically locked their at-large position for the NCAAs. But we saw 6-3 and 9-2 in not must-win games, but okay, we're taking this seriously now. We really got to win. Yes, it's CC, and obviously CC season's done and not the best team, and they were playing their backup goaltender in their 3rd game and most of their 2nd game. I think Imberico got hurt midway through that 2nd game, but I think Denver's, I mean, last year we saw them win the whole thing. And they're going to probably go into this tournament as a 3 seed. Even if they win the NCHC tournament, they're probably going to be a 3 in this tournament, which I would hate to be a 2 seed and have to line up with them in the first round. Now, is Western a better team than Denver? So they very well could be. I'd like to see that title game. And yeah, Western's a very dangerous team. We've seen from St. Cloud's perspective, none of the games that St. Cloud played this year against them were competitive. From St. Cloud, I mean, ass kickings for four times over against these two teams. But that's been Western's MO this year. They're kicking ass against St. Cloud and Miami and Alaska Anchorage and Bowling Green and their non-conference and Ferris F and State. As I mentioned in the last show, 2 wins out of their now 28 have come against teams that are currently in at-large position. One of those is against Michigan, who's going to be hanging on for dear life. Depending on how it shakes out this weekend, they could go into that tournament with just 1 win on their record against a team also in the NCAAs. It's just this is going to sound like a cuss word, but I feel like with Western this year, it's kind of like how I thought about Mankato when they made the title game that year, where it's like they're racking up this 30-win season in the CCHA. I don't really know how great they are. Now that Mankato team they're a period away from winning the national title, so it very well could be, but it's Western. They've won 1 game in the NCAA tournament in their entire history. This is the first conference championship they've ever won, and they've been around for 55 years or something at the D1 level. So yeah, part of that's unfair is just that this isn't a brand that we've expected to know that they're going to bring it in the postseason. That's not something that they've done ever, really. So now you can always change history. And again, you just need to make the tournament in order to make that history, get that opportunity. I think the NCHC's down this year. I'll take the other conferences is going to win the NCAAs this year. But could it happen? Sure, because anything can happen. Because you mentioned Duluth's won 3 of these, so literally anything can happen in the NCAAs. I remain skeptical of Western when it comes to playing top end talent because they really haven't done it too often this year. And so, but yeah, I'll take them against North Dakota. I mean, they've handled them this year, and North Dakota beating Omaha on the road. I mean, good comeback for them. It was the writing on the wall. It was the one that wasn't very surprising.
It was kind of interesting though, because I think Omaha was up 2-0.
Right.
And
that's like the Omaha of years past, choking that one away.
And then Minnesota Duluth was up 3-0 against Arizona State. And Arizona State was able to come back in that Saturday game and end up winning in overtime on just a kind of a crazy back and forth affair.
And watching that game after the St. Cloud game, it was like watching that one was like playing at 2 times speed versus the St. Cloud West. Like just the passing, we're talking about this. Like several of these goals are just like tic-tac-toe, 3 guys touch it. Guy goes from the boards to beyond, right behind the net. 1 touch pass to the guy in front of the net for a 1-time score. It's just like, I remember like Ryan Lash did that 50 times in his St. Cloud career or something similar to that. And it's like, I didn't see that like at any point this year for the Huskies. Like at least very, very few and far between. We saw plays where like multiple passes set up something like that. And so it was just like, it was refreshing to watch a game that really had no dog in the fight, no pun intended, but just fun to see a back and forth kind of offensive battle like that.
And that's what I'm expecting this weekend too.
Like between like involving Arizona State in particular, or just for all these games?
All of these games, really.
So I'll go with you with picking
best goaltender.
Who's the best goaltender of these 4?
Yeah.
I mean, you got Davis, who we've seen take over a tournament before.
I mean, that's true.
Septon Felser's too much of a drama queen.
That's for sure.
Yeah, well, I've been the skeptical one about Davis, but again, you get to the tournament and he snaps his fingers and Denver turns into 2-1 Kings with Davis providing the backstop. He's the brick wall all of a sudden. So it could happen. I mean, for pound, I'd probably take that Slukinski. But again, he's the unknown versus Davis.
Has the track record. Thing. Yeah.
Pavicic for Arizona State, I think, is more closer to average. I mean, he can play well, but more often their games are these, which I like. I will say, even though that Powers seems like a tool, that team, that Arizona State style, it's a fun style where it's all offense. They don't really play much defense, or at least their defense is more focused on offense than defense. So, I mean, if they're going to win games, it's going to be more high scoring affairs. They're going to outscore the other teams rather than relying on a shutdown goaltender. Which again, we don't see that too often in playoffs. Like teams have they agree to play like a muck 'em up kind of 2-1 game. Saw the BC and Denver in the title game last year. Frustrates me about playoff hockey in general. Don't see as much looseness, and everyone's more timid, waiting for the other team to make a mistake. But at least in this tournament, I think that we're going to get some good action. But I'm going to go Slukinski's probably my goaltender of the tournament, or he's the one of these 4 teams I'd be most confident with him in that.
You do make an intriguing point about Western Michigan and their actual weather or record against solid teams.
And you only play the schedule that's in front of you.
And especially when no one in front of it 6 times.
Well, you didn't put them on the schedule this year. I'll give them that credit. But no one put a gun to their head to put Anchorage on the schedule this year. I will strain to say that. And most of that is due to, another thing that I've been fighting about, NCHC was a little bit down this year. And I'm not saying that the NCHC is a bad conference this year, but down in relative to past NCHC years, where we've gotten 4 to 6 teams.
Best in the nation.
Best in the world.
Best in the world. It is the best no matter what.
Not in comparison to the rest of the nation this year, and not in comparison to past years of this conference. I don't really think that's like a hot take even. It's just the facts. Again, that's out of Western's control as far as the conference schedule.
Dragnet button? Do I need a...
You could.
Just the facts. Just the facts, man.
Yes, the NCHC is not that great this year. I said it.
I like it.
But that doesn't matter. Like I said, it's if you make the dance, all that goes out the window. Yep. And you've got as good of chance as anybody else in that tournament. And even more so than that. I mean, Westerns, they're a very dangerous team. And so they could definitely win it. But let's get back to our picks here. So we'll both put Western. We agree there. Western's going to beat Dakota, and everyone's going to go back to the bar. Very sad. That's wearing green. How about that Denver-Arizona State game? Are we going to get another 6-5 barn burner? What are you thinking for that early game on Friday?
I do think it'll be a barn burner, and I'm actually going to go Arizona State on it.
Really? Okay, I want to be different. I want to at least have one of these games be different. So I'll go Denver.
Okay,
I'll go Denver, ending Arizona State's season.
Who's your title?
Denver wins these things too often. I'll keep the Western Michigan fans pissed off at me. I'll go Denver.
All right, I'm going Arizona State. I'm on that bandwagon. Let's go. Let's have them get the automatic bid, and then I can absolutely love the narrative of nobody believed in them because they were picked 8th in the conference.
Do you want that, or do you want, after they lose, them to look at their 20-win season and say we were hosed by the math?
Oh God, Powers would, wouldn't he? He would totally.
He would.
He would go to it and say, and that would be delicious.
It's been building up to that because we saw this last week where he was claiming that Arizona State is the best 5-on-5 team in the conference, even though Western's got 3 more regulation wins than them in conference. But he's got some little birdie in his department who's feeding him some fancy stats.
Yeah, what was we were the only
team to beat everybody else in regulation in conference. And it sounded rehearsed. It sounded like he'd been fed that line and made to repeat it two times back.
It reminds me of Little Big League, where they're in the announcer's booth and John Gordon is fed this line, these stats, like randomly throughout the movie about in domed stadiums north of the Mason-Dixon line.
This was very similar to that.
This was very similar to
out of that script.
Weird stat.
So I'm looking. I feel like if they miss out, he's gonna bring like a Matt type rant about how we was hosed by the committee. He might even maybe there's gonna be like a resume, a dropping of the word resume somewhere in that rant. I feel like there was some hope there, but I did pick them in our last Pick the Field show to make the field, so I wouldn't be opposed to them winning this tournament because they do need to win this final face-off in order to qualify. Same with North Dakota, but what are you giggling about there?
It's the 14th one-run game for the Tigers already this season. Tops for any team north of the Mason-Dixon line whose home games are not played in a dome. Last year, though, he was 6th in the American League in hitting right-handers he was facing for the first time after the 7th inning at home.
I feel like that's kind of like what our old Omaha announcer, the one that we ragged on like incessantly a couple of years ago, he would pull out, because there was something like this is the longest home conference winning streak for Omaha since 2014 or something really strained like that. So those stats are always fun.
Lou has hit .416 lifetime versus Hanley in the month of September in even years. God. Anyway, side note, Little Big League is a great movie and really underrated when it comes to sports movies. I will
been a
just
while.
say that.
I think I saw it in the theater. Came out.
It's solid. It's solid. So, any other national observation? You want to hop into Woden?
Well, what do we got? I mean, we've got the You Are the Committee tool ready to play along.
We don't have a sounder for that.
Want. No, we don't. But if you want to knock yourself out, it is kind of fun because, we should touch on the hashtag Chaos League in CCHA, who they did it again. Always are willing to and able to surprise us and come up with something that we didn't even think was on the table. And this year, they're going to play a conference championship game where the conference's representative in the national tournament is already known. Mankato versus St. Thomas. We saw this in the Summit League for basketball. St. Thomas made the title game there, but due to the NCAA's sort of asinine rule that
just a weird rule. I don't know.
5-year postseason ban for jumping up to D1. I could see that like putting a ban into place if you're bumping down a division or two,
which I believe has been reduced.
What? Like you got to sit out?
No, I think it's now only 4.
Oh, St. Thomas's, yes.
Yeah.
But this year, obviously, it's still in effect.
Correct.
But they're going to get 1 year probably shaved off for next year. And certainly when they make to the NCHC in 2026. Yeah, 26, 27. It'll be lifted by then, even if they don't get that last year of the 5 years waived. But now that's so my initial reaction is like, does Mankato even really want to play that game? Yes, they do, because while that game doesn't matter as far as who's going to make it to the NCAAs, it still has an effect on pairwise. And Mankato does have something to play for. They actually have a 10% chance, according to the Matrix, which we'll get to that. Don't use the sounder now, because we've got a segment sort of devoted to it. Just wait.
Okay.
But according to that, they've got a 10% chance to make it as the 12th overall, which would be the 3rd seed. So obviously not a great chance to make that, but they've got an opportunity to jockey for pairwise position, which I feel like that's going to be enough for them to take that game seriously. And I think St. Thomas will take the game seriously. They're going to want to hang a banner, and likely, if they win that game, that banner should be shaped in such a way as that it resembles a middle finger to the NCAA. Like, we won a banner, we won this conference tournament, but because of you, we are not able to relish in our victory and go to the NCAA tournament. So I feel like they're going to bring it. So I don't think that, if that game was Bemidji versus St. Thomas, that would be kind of pointless to play, because Bemidji would be locked in as the lowest, the 16th seed. And I saw too that the St. Thomas, I think it was the beat writer, said that if Bemidji won that game, that St. Thomas would have played that at a neutral site, which I was a little surprised at. He said that it wouldn't be a very good look for the league to play the game in front of 900 people. It would be a worse look for that to have the winner of that, or at least the representative Bemidji, predetermined. Much worse look than 900 fans packed into a stadium. But we don't get to see that chaos play out. I think we'll see a normal, regular game that both teams compete in Mankato there on Saturday. But again, haven't had a conference title game. We never had that scenario take place. So again, leave it up to the CCHA to come up with new stuff that's never happened before. But I wanted to bring that up.
Minnesota State, St. Thomas have played some tight games this year too. 3-2 win, and then a 3-2 overtime loss for St. Thomas when they played the home and home in January/February. And then earlier in the year, the November series, Mankato won 5-3, and then it was a 1-1 overtime tie. So it's gonna be I think it's gonna be kind of an interesting wrinkle, and like you said, with the opportunity to really stick it to the NCAA, being like, this is a stupid rule, we deserve it. Be interesting to see how this one shakes out.
Yeah. So again, we know the end result there as far as who's going to make the tournament, but still some intrigue to that game. The Big Ten title game, not much on the line there. It's Michigan State hosting Ohio State. Michigan State's locked into the number 2 overall seed. Ohio State's locked into a 3 seed. It'll be somewhere between 9 and 11. So not a ton to play for there except for a banner if they want to hang it. Atlantic Hockey's going to come down. Sacred Heart, your team, took one on the chin there against Bentley.
I don't want to talk about it.
So it'll be Holy Cross versus Bentley. I do stick taps, though, to the Atlantic Hockey, the only conference that still plays 2 rounds of best 2 out of 3. That was this past weekend with Bentley sweeping Sacred Heart in Sacred Heart for that. But it'll just be a one and done for the title game at Holy Cross. And those teams, I mean, they're going to be the 16th seed most likely, barring upsets elsewhere. But even both of those teams are going to be like in the 22 to 24 range. So not like there's been some years the Atlantic Hockey's, we know there's been years where Atlantic Hockey gets into the 30s and 40s in pairwise, but 2 pretty decent teams with Holy Cross and Bentley. One of those teams that could finish under Atlantic Hockey would be Northeastern, who beat Boston College in Hockey East. They're the only team of the 4 there that don't have a at-large spot locked. Maine, Boston University, and Connecticut, the others in hockey. So Northeastern's the only team that has the chance to just make the tournament. They're under 500 this year. But the other teams have clinched their spots. Obviously, there's still pairwise position up for grabs. I was kind of playing around with the tool today, and it seems like whoever wins that conference tournament is going to get a one of those three teams that I mentioned have already locked up their berths. Who's ever going to win that tournament, if one of those three teams wins it, they're going to get a 1 seed out of the deal. So there's certainly something to play for there, and Northeastern has everything to play for. So that'll be an interesting one. ECAC, you've got Quinnipiac, the only team that's currently in at-large position. They could make the tournament even if they don't win this tournament, which they typically haven't. They've only won it once in Pecknold's run there, and being like basically the de facto first place team in that conference for like 10 years running. Typically have not played very well in this tournament. You got Clarkson, you've got Dartmouth, and then you've got Cornell with Mike Schaefer going out on a high note possibility. So one team that seems relatively safe-ish. The other three teams sort of playing for their NCAA lives this weekend in Lake Placid. You looking for, like, I'm just looking especially at leagues where a team currently outside the field could spoil the fun and knock out other at-large teams. NCHC with North Dakota and Arizona State, Hockey East with Northeastern, ECAC with those three teams that aren't Quinnipiac. Do you see, of those three leagues, are you expecting upsets in one or more than one of those leagues?
I don't know if expecting upsets is the right word, but I definitely wouldn't surprise me. Just looking at where we're at with the matrix, and like even when you said you're talking about Atlantic hockey, at 24-25 in the pairwise, it's with Cornell, Clarkson, they're sure they're outside, but they're kind of still on the bubble when it comes to the actual numbers of their ranking, not their probability of actually getting in. But I mean, sitting down at 19, it's not like it's that huge of an upset to end up beating the 12 Quinnipiac. So
right.
All of that is really, really kind of intriguing for me, and kind of interesting how that's all going to shake out. I do feel not only this series of games this weekend, but even the first round of the NCAA tournament, I think there's going to be some nail biters and some overtime games, and I wouldn't even including that Bentley Holy Cross. If one of those two, even if they do, face Boston College, which is the probability there. As much as I would love another Holy Cross Minnesota rematch, I think that would be great. I do feel like those types of teams, I think they could still give them a run for their money.
Yeah, I mean, Holy Cross has a win over UConn this year, and like I said, UConn has a chance to be a 1 seed this year. Bentley beat Maine in Maine this year, who again could be a 1 seed. These teams are capable of playing at least competitive games, if not outright winning games against these good teams. So yeah, I'm no team this year with this field, no matter how it shakes out, if there are a lot of upsets in these conference tournaments, it's going to be a pretty evenly matched. And I don't feel like we're going to have one of those years like we did a couple years ago. We had like the 7-goal wins by all those Big Ten teams. I mean, who knows? There's going to be a bunch of Big Ten teams in the tournament this year again, but something tells me I don't feel like we're going to get those kind of blowouts play out this year. Should be exciting, and yeah, looking at those leagues that Michigan's a team where Michigan needs all of the chalk to win. If one of those conferences has a team, McMahon calls them line movers. Basically, they would move the cut line up 1. So they would steal an at-large spot by winning the auto bid. Michigan needs one of those leagues. If one of those leagues wins their tournament or has a team outside the at-large spot win the tournament, they're done. If two of those leagues go that way, then Penn State's done. So, I mean, those teams in particular are rooting for chalk. Don't want teams like Arizona State stealing spots. So, as much as you hate those teams, you might find some rooting interest this weekend in these conference tournaments as well.
Anything else around the state of college hockey before we switch over to the women and the tournament that entertainment that provided?
Do we want to do that, or do we want to do the Woden, the kind of the commentary on the commentary? It's up to you, producer.
Yeah, let's do the commentary now. So let's get that going.
Time now for the commentary on the commentary.
Discourse.
There was some discourse this week.
There was. Take it away. This is your commentary.
We brought it up last week, and I didn't even really think too much about it because I didn't think it was that important to discuss. But Minnesota's loss to Notre Dame in their first round series, the Big Ten tournament, not this past weekend, but the weekend before, meant that the Gophers, who are locked as a berth at large spot in the NCAAs and likely either a 1 seed or a high 2 seed, but they're going to go a minimum of 19 days, perhaps 20 days between that last game that they lost to Notre Dame and playing their first round NCAA game.
And of course, we took this as a dunk on Bob. because of course we did. So this is where we came from, and maybe why we didn't harp on it much is because we wanted to get our 1-2 on Bob about him complaining about not enough rest, and now him probably complaining about too much rest if the first game doesn't go his way.
Well, lo and behold, I pull up CHN last week and I see there's a new article titled "Big Problem," with the 1 instead of the I in big, as the Big Ten stylizes its logo.
Woden just sat on that for about 4 years.
He's probably used that title in like 4 or 5 articles now, going back some years. Big Ten needs a better playoff format is the subtitle. And the thrust of his argument, and I'm using thrust intentionally, is that these long layoffs, these conference playoff formats where it's spread over 3 weekends, just have these inherent problems of what if these top seeds lose in that first round, and they've set up these periods of long rest, which really sets them up poorly in preparation of the NCAA tournament, pointing to last year where Wisconsin did this exact same thing, losing the 2-7 matchup, waiting 19, 20 days until playing Quinnipiac in the NCAAs and losing that game, coming out flat and losing that game in overtime. And pretty directly kind of blaming the long rest as far as chalking up that loss to the long rest. I would say the fact that you lost to the last place team in your conference playoffs might have led one to believe that Wisconsin wasn't that great of a team last year. Perhaps that's why they lost to Quinnipiac in the NCAAs rather than the long rest prior to playing them. But he seems to think that this is worthy of retinkering the format, so much so that one of his solutions, his first solution, in fact, is that the conference should go back to a neutral site, or at least a campus site, have it at one spot, perhaps hosted by the top seed in conference, which is baffling. I mean, you've looked, the best thing that these campus site tournaments have going for it is the great attendance. Mariucci has broken attendance records, I think, the last 2 times that they've hosted the title game for the Big Ten. I think this goes back to our first run of the podcast when the Big Ten and then CCHA first went to this format. I think we were a little skeptical. As it's turned out, this is what the NCHC is doing starting next year, going all on campus for their tournament. And as 2 people here who are very much in favor of going campus sites for the NCAA regionals as well, we feel like that's sort of the progression that the sport should take. And for someone like Bowdoin to suggest going away from that, all in service of top seeds crapping out in their conference playoffs, which has happened twice. It's not like this happens every year. I feel like that's an overreaction. And the last thing that we should do is go back to anything resembling a neutral site, whether it actually be at a different college's rink or a literal neutral site. I think that's a terrible idea and sort of a risible idea from Woden to bring that up. Now, he's always been someone who takes the side in the West.
Yes.
Now, his other option is to kind of condense the tournament into 2 weekends, which is somewhat like what Hockey East does. Now, the trade-off there is Hockey East has gotten rid of all series in their tournament. They don't play any 2 out of 3s. I mentioned like Atlantic Hockey plays 2 rounds of 2 out of 3s. Hockey East is all single game one and dones. And yeah, if you want to have an 11-team league, you can condense a 11-team tournament into 2 weekends. And then because you're having a Wednesday day of games as well, the first round of their games, and because everybody's, an hour or 2 apart geographically, you can get away with that. But the trade-off there is, again, I don't like single game elimination. I like a format that has at least 1 round of 2 out of 3. I would love that out of the NCAAs to get at least one round of 2 out of 3. That would be a dream of mine. So
how about 2 and aggregate goals?
They used to do that.
Go back to it.
Yeah, that 88 through 92 that they played the first 2 years first 2 rounds was 2 out of 3. And then you got to the Frozen Four and it was one single game elimination from that point on. That was like the best format that the tournament has been on. But for this suggestion, just the main thing is, why are we grieving the losses of top seeds in their tournaments and forcing a too long period of inaction between games as the Gophers are in this year? I'm reminded of Robert Downey Sr. in Boogie Nights. That's not an MP. That's a YP. Your problem. I don't see why this is the responsibility of the rest of the conference to rejigger their playoff format just to try to appease a team losing their first round matchups. Win those games. And I last show, I sort of jokingly threw it out there. Just have Michigan and Minnesota play each other. They both lost their first round series. The more I think about it, if this is a problem, which again, I don't think it is, but NCAA should just let teams in this position play an exhibition game. It would be a quickly scheduled one, but we've seen like the women's team for SCSU schedule these exhibition games in the Christmas break with St. Thomas on short notice the last 2 years. Like, it's possible. And the NCAA doesn't allow that, which is, I'm sure, the reason that they're not going to be able to do that. So it's not going to be a situation that's going to happen every year. If it does happen, grant the teams leave to coordinate a exhibition game with whoever they want to bring in. And it doesn't even need to be another team in that position, waiting on possibly. Yeah. I mean, from those teams' position, portal's not officially open for business. You could pay that team off You obviously like pay for Lindenwood's travel expenses and whatnot. You could throw some nil money at all their players. And for their players' perspective, for their trouble, yeah, it's a showcase. You can see what you want to. If you want to enter the portal, see what your players can do. It seems like a no lose situation for both teams. The Gophers shake the rust off. Lindenwood gets a little extra revenue that they weren't budgeting on. Seems like a better solution, at least, than any of Woden's suggestions. What do you think?
And it was really weird listening to the podcast too, to their CHN podcast with McMahon and talking about it. And then Hockey East commissioner was also talking about it and was saying that, the Hockey East commissioner, I was thinking, was kind of talking about both sides, about how the importance of rest, but also saying that, coaches want to be playing this time of year and something to play for. But I do completely agree. It's like, clearly the Big Ten has this format and they want this format. Why? Well, to have an article saying that this is a huge problem is, I don't know. You said it the best. It's a you problem. It for me, it's very much like watch your own bobber. Like it doesn't
Pun
affect.
intended.
Yeah, it doesn't really affect anything other than the teams. And, we'll see if Motzko brings up a stink about it. He brought up a stink about not enough rest between the regional games, and he got that fixed. So we'll see if anything comes out of him this end. But I don't know. I just kind of rolled my eyes, and I was like, this is searching for an answer to a problem that I don't think really exists.
Right.
Unless you are trying to fabricate one, I guess. I don't know. It was an odd column to write.
And Woden's a guy that he's in favor of whatever the majority of coaches are in favor of. So I think that's where
he's got to keep those sources. Ideas.
That's where he's thinking. His mind is like, Motzko's he's going to hate this rest. He hates this rest. Mike Hastings hated the rest last year. So because of that, the wheels start spinning, and I got to do something about this. And again, I don't think you need to do that. Don't need to tinker the format, but if anything, just let them play. Just let them schedule and play an exhibition game. If that solves any issues, that seems like a more plausible, reasonable answer.
Or maybe don't lose your first round match.
Don't lose your first round game against the last place team in the league.
Yeah, and if your real problem is that I'm going to get too healthy for this series, I don't know. I've been playing a lot of Dark Souls lately, and I don't know
a few times.
I don't know if you're familiar with the Souls games at all.
Just what you've told me.
Okay. Well, anytime anybody goes on to like a Reddit page or asking for advice, there's always one comment, and it's always the top comment, and it just says, "Get good." And that's kind of how I feel about this scenario. Is like, hey, you're upset it's going to be too much loss? Win the game. Get good. Like, I'm sorry. That's kind of what it boils down to for me.
And I suppose we'll see. I mean, if the Gophers, like, let's say, make the Frozen Four, then this wasn't a problem at all. Oh. Like, does he retract the article at that point?
For having so much rest.
Right.
It'd be wonderful. Woden retraction would be a point counterpoint. Woden v. Woden.
And let's not forget too, we're going to transition into the women's side here in a little bit, who the women's, between the regionals and the Frozen Four, the women's side rightfully does not put in the week of rest, which we hate. Men's side does. So there, from the Sunday of the regionals to the following Thursday, teams that play on the Sunday regional final day. So you've got 11 days of rest there that you specifically asked for. So we know that that's your 11 days no one will complain about, because that is worked into the system on the coach's stipulation. So we're looking at 8 more days, 1 more week. So above and beyond that 11 days, it's just too much rest. It's just a constantly moving goalpost, and it's hard to keep track of it. And I feel like they're just coming up with things to be mad about at this point, and it's exhausting.
Let's switch over to the women. As you brought it up, women's national tournament did start, and had pretty much went the way we figured it would. With the Frozen, or the women's Frozen Four being Wisconsin, Ohio State, Minnesota for the 3 WCHA teams, and Cornell was able to squeak by 1-0 over Minnesota Duluth. You were able to call that the game between the Minnesota Duluth and I'm blanking on it. Was that the new hot champion?
Come on, McFly.
I don't know
who's your second favorite team.
No, I don't want to say it. Can't you? Sacred Heart. My love, my second love. But that that was going to be a closer matchup. It wasn't going to be the big. Now,
I didn't say it. I didn't say 6-1, but I basically did, because I went back and I said it's going to be 5 goals. I gave you from 0 to 4 goals. I gave you all of those, but I'll say 5 goal margin. And then you're like, it's likely that Gascon's not going to give up a goal. And I said she's going to give up 1. So I basically said it's going to be 6-1, even though I didn't say 6-1.
Yeah.
I only bring that up because that's the second straight year that I've nailed the score of the Newha game in the NCAAs. Last year, I did say 7-1 Cornell over Stonehill. I said 7-1 exactly. So I'm going to count that as 2 straight years of nailing the Newha
think you can
score.
count it. I think you can count it. And
it's not as good as the
over-under of a half goal.
You're just off.
I was just off on that.
Big props to Devin Millwater, whose garbage time floater from the blue line was tipped in for that 6th and decisive 5-goal margin goal. Thank you very much. Old friend. And
State legend, Devin Millwater.
And dumping change legend. Breakout
That's
star, Devin Millwater.
So.
Yeah, you will always be remembered. But yeah, not as good as the one time a couple years ago where I nailed both scores of the St. Club and Midgie series.
Yeah.
We don't predict scores like really too often at all. But
no, and
I did it that one series and I nailed it both games.
And it's just, it goes back to, the downfall of Us Show. And Us Show always had predictions for games, and I don't know if they still do. I don't go to that site really anymore.
I don't think they do, but I don't go to it often.
Well, that's because all of them were 3-2. Like everyone was a 3-2. If
that would have been a
spicy
recurring bit in the first run of the podcast was we would like the commentary on the commentary. We didn't have the sounder back then, but we were like Woden was a flicker in our eye then. We were all razor focused on the downfall of Us Show. Yeah. So that was what we were wasting our time on 8 years ago. Those were the days.
Those were the days. So, and then, like we've said, all signs are kind of pointing to Wisconsin, Ohio State for the 3rd straight year. Do you see that changing?
I really can't go off that prediction. I think Cornell's decent. I think they're going to give Ohio State a run, and Minnesota being the host school here at the Frozen Four and a rivalry game with Wisconsin. I mean, that last game they played up in Amsoil for the WCHA tournament title game was a good game, although we both kind of mentioned Wisconsin might not have been 100% engaged in that game. Didn't have a ton to play for other than a banner. But I think just, again, with the home crowd somewhat in their favor, obviously it's not going to be literally all Gopher fans there, but it will be a benefit playing in their own building, their own dressing room, familiar environs, et cetera, et cetera. So I think these are going to be 2 good semis. not to rip off us, Joe, but 3-2, 2-1, I think. Kinds of games. And we saw that last couple of years of this Wisconsin Ohio State, high-powered offenses, but 1-0 in their title games. Like, I hope we don't get that again, just because a 1-0 game is less than ideal. But we've been saying this since like the first half of the year. It's probably going to end up with those two teams. So I can't go off of that prediction.
I think I'm going to change it up, and I will say that Cornell's going to beat Ohio State.
Really?
I am more convinced of that than I am Minnesota beating Wisconsin.
Yes, I would agree with that. Now, Cornell and Ohio State actually played each other this year in non-conference. Ohio State beat them in their the icebreaker that Ohio State hosted. And that was at the Blue Jackets arena, or no, it was at Nationwide, I think. Is that where the Blue Jackets play? It wasn't at Ohio State's regular rink. It might have been at where the men play, actually, and the basketball team. I can't remember what the name of that is, but something like that. And so, just looking up that was a tight. I remember watching that game. I was back in October. 7-3, but it was close. It was 5-3 going into the third. So that's a while ago, but some familiarity between those, and obviously Wisconsin and Minnesota have hooked up several times this year, and all of those games have gone Wisconsin's way. So yeah, between those two teams, if we're going to look for an upset, I would say Cornell. I would take them over the Gophers' chances of upsetting Wisconsin, but I'll still stick with my original pick and go with the Badgers and the Buckeyes. I will say this about the regionals. Yeah, you mentioned it's all chalk. It was all chalk for the regionals except for the St. Lawrence over Penn State. That was the only upset, either in the first round or the quarterfinals. I will say, so those first round games are played at the higher seed. So Clarkson and BU is played at Wisconsin. Duluth and Sacred Heart played at Cornell, Penn State, and St. Lawrence played at Ohio State. Not good attendance in those games. Just put those games, just have it all be campus sites. That's my proposal. What you'd have to do there, again, I'm the wheels are spinning in terms of what would coaches bitch about? Rest, right? And short travel. You'd probably want to move up those games to Wednesday instead of Thursday. And still have the regional finals on Saturday. If we're still doing the 11-team field and you've got that one non-regional that's just 2 games, you could move that to Friday if you wanted to put that on like prime time. But at least the other 3 games that have a first round game, like in that case, you just have Duluth host that game against Sacred Heart. And then Duluth or whoever ends up winning it would then travel to Cornell for the Saturday game for the regional final. It's not a good look to play tournament games in front of 100 people in a building that seats several thousand, like we saw at Cornell, for instance. So I feel like that's, if you want to copy the men and put the week in between the regionals and the Frozen Four, then you could put the regional finals on Sunday and have those first round games on Friday or on Wednesday midweek. That'll be plenty of time to travel. You'd probably be saving money too, because you wouldn't have to travel. Like, so Duluth and Sacred Heart both had to travel to Cornell. Boston University and Clarkson both had to come from the East Coast to Madison for that game. And then they both had to return after the weekend. You could have saved a little bit of that with BU having to go up to Clarkson, be a bus trip. So you'd probably be able to save some revenue and some costs. You would add revenue and save costs, and you'd add atmosphere by putting those games on campus. It's just 3 games. And if you go back to last show, also proposing to expand it to 12 to have 4 of these first round games. Just put them all on campus. If you kind of like a half measure, to put these games on a quasi for the Duluth and Sacred Heart. That was at a neutral site to them. It was at Cornell, which Duluth ended up playing on Saturday, but go the full measure. You have it all on campus for the regionals. Keep the Frozen Four neutral as it is. Again, it is Ritter. It's literally a team who's playing in its home rink. But I did see that it's a sellout. All the tickets have been sold for that, which is good to see. And so,
and I think it was sold before. I think it was sold out before Minnesota won.
Oh yeah, it was like 2 weeks ago. I read that they had sold that out already. So, which is good to see. Good. So, but yeah, just keep put them all on campus. I want to see at least good crowds for all these games because they're important games, and it's hard to get into these games if there's just no one in the crowd in the stands. So also, that's my soapbox.
It's really good hockey. So.
Yeah.
Patty Kaz was announced, and a trio of Badgers, which I don't think is that big of a surprise considering the season that they had. But we had Caroline Harvey, Casey O'Brien, and Layla Edwards, who was my heart pick that I thought should be the three. I thought they were going to get Koltakova in there for the East Coast flavor, but they did not. Ended up the committee ended up voting for all three. I still think it's O'Brien's by kind of a landslide with so I don't think there's a lot of drama there. But I was happy to see Layla Edwards. I've been very high on her, and sure enough, she got kind of a big goal against Clarkson too to put that one out of reach on a nice one-timer as well. That game was actually a really good game. Clarkson scoring the early goal against Wisconsin. And then,
probably the best of the regional finals. I mean, the Colgate Minnesota game became a game in the third period. 3-0 going into the Gophers, but then Colgate coming back and probably added 5 minutes to the clock there. I bet Colgate would have tied it. But the Clarkson Wisconsin game, I think, from start to finish was a little bit more intriguing. So I would say the best of the bunch for the regional finals.
And then, are you in agreement with Patty Kaz?
Yeah, I think you got to give it to O'Brien, being finalist last year, leading the league in scoring, significant margin this year. You might see. We saw Sims and O'Brien were finalists last year, and O'Brien getting the repeat nomination. You might see that with either or both Edwards or Harvey next year. I got to imagine they've got to be preseason favorites for that next year. So this might just be a warm-up exercise for them. Might not be the last time that they get nominated for this. But yeah, I feel like from last, and it feels like the committee might have learned a lesson from last year. I think they got a little bit of guff for voting the way they did. No shade on Izzy Daniel, but I think it was one of those things where some folks saw through the voting process. There could have been a canceling out of the Wisconsin players or a concerted effort from the eastern block of voters to go with the more local player of those three. This year, I think they got it right. Even though it seems weird that it's three players from the same team, I think these are clearly the three best players in the country. I don't think they got this one wrong. So, and yeah, I've got to imagine. I always laugh because Casey O'Brien, I went to high school with a guy named Casey O'Brien, who had a nickname that I can't mention on this show if we want to keep our clean rating.
Ooh.
Yeah, interesting guy, and not I don't know, not the most savory individual, let's say. So when I think of Casey O'Brien, that's my first.
That's your first go-to, huh?
Mental image, and it's not the Casey O'Brien that plays on Wisconsin, who's probably going to win the Patty Kaz this year. So if she does, and she has a memorable Frozen Four here, perhaps that will supersede the other Casey O'Brien in my memory.
Sure enough. we did get some portal news for the women as well. So I do have to pop in some Enya. Some only time would probably be my go-to.
You can plug that in because again, we're disregarding DMCA violations. So just plug that full track right here.
Just right there. If you guys have any type of streaming service, go ahead and play some Enya right now as Grace Delmonico enters the portal. Her seven games and no points scored, and considering she didn't play a game the first year, pretty much
she's got 3 years left then.
Somewhere else, yeah,
right. She'd have 3 years of eligibility because she got a red shirt. I think that's right.
So she's out. Greta Henderson as well had a couple of goals, a couple of assists, but was fairly quiet in the second half of the season, much like a lot of St. Cloud's office. And then one that kind of surprised me, Cameron Bray, defenseman. I thought she was getting, some solid time out there, and looks like she's out in the portal. Obviously, I've got maybe a little bit of a different opinion about the portal in general, but we don't go into these players' decisions and their mindsets, or whose idea or whatnot, or maybe into the portal and then coming back out. We saw that with Sven Yvoked did that. So, if they do end up leeching on to another team, I just want to say, thank you for being a Husky. Congratulations and good luck, as long as you don't go to a WCHA team.
Yeah, and we were doing some of the math on the last show. I mean, we're losing a bunch, and then a freshman class of perhaps as large as 10 players coming in, and something like 10 or 9, depending on. Well, we know Wolf's coming back because we think she's coming back, medical redshirt for her, but just with what you're losing from graduate/seniors. And then with the freshman class that you're bringing in, there were definitely going to be some tough decisions to make, which I'm sure this last week in the post-mortem for Odalski after the season ended, I'm sure this last week was spent, last 2 weeks have been spent talking with some of these players, seeing what their how they're feeling about their future outlook, if they're enjoying their, role that they're playing here at St. Cloud. As you said, it's a lot of factors are at play, not just hockey. I mean, there's life situations as well that we're not privy to, obviously, but definitely a numbers crunch. And Badalski's always shown a willingness to dip his toe in the portal in the 3 years that he's been here. He's gotten 3 to 5 players or so every year from the portal. And if he's planning on doing that, does he plan to do that based on who he loses to the portal? Obviously the incoming class has to influence that as well. But as you said, Henderson, I didn't realize until I looked at her stat line this year that she was as cold as she was since basically Thanksgiving. Just the 1 point there. Got off to a great start with that. She was playing with Sunderland and Henderson on that line to start the season, but wasn't
Zimmerman.
And Zimmerman, kind of the international line there to start the year. Points in her first 4 games in non-conference, but struggled towards the end of the season. And players like Sorial seemed to step up. Like Sorial and Sunderland became kind of a line pairing that was really clicking at the end of the year. So perhaps she was the odd woman out in some line combinations there. And Bray, she gotten some power play opportunities towards the second half of the season. I think player like Siri Urela maybe edged her out on the depth chart slightly. We'll see how like the defensive, if we're assuming Wolf's coming back, how the defensive pecking order goes. You would have thought that Bray would have been, maybe, I mean, in competition at least for the top pairing coming into next year. So impressive at times. I think she was a little inconsistent, but certainly not a player that I would have preferred to lose, put it that way. So those two were unexpected. Delmonico is, I mean, it was a break my heart situation just because of I know of your affection for her and the expectations that you put on her for the bit, yes. But that's more along the lines of what I think of a typical portal entrant to be, just someone that, a numbers game and wasn't able to crack the lineup on a regular basis. She could move to, like a Atlantic Hockey Conference, Nuha, something like that. I mean, she could get top line minutes at Post next year, for instance. Franklin Pierce. And maybe produce a stat line that we'd be like, we missed out on that. We'll see. And as you mentioned, best of luck to all of them. But if this means that we might get 3 more additions via the portal, with some more experienced players, because we're bringing in so many freshmen. I think you tweeted out another Finn in the fold. I'm not sure if that was for this year, for this coming year, or for the future years, but we've seen Adelsky's very active with international recruits. Got the Russian recruit coming in last week. I'm blanking on her name, but we talked about her last week. But he's always active in that market for players. And he's, like I said, has shown a willingness to dabble in the portal as well, for especially like last year, getting players like Promisberger and Parent, experienced players, graduate year players. You're not going to have 5th year players anymore, but still opportunities for more experienced players to come in to sort of offset the amount of youth that you have with the team. It'd be a good balance. So yeah, sad to see these players go, but also intrigued as we see kind of the additions that get made here in the coming weeks. Because I don't think that we're going to be silent when it comes to getting additions via the portal.
Yeah, I wonder if Adolsky's comment about, our top 6 isn't scoring and Greta hearing that. Probably looking too much.
See ya.
Yeah. The Finn, and I apologize as I'm going to butcher this name. But I'm going to go Raleigh Mustinen, RAILIMUSTONEN. She's 20, so I would imagine she's coming in. And has her as a forward and a D. But this season, 17 goals, 11 assists for 28 points in 31 games.
Where was that at? Is that in Finland?
In Finland, yep.
I tweeted about this a couple of weeks ago. Like, Henderson might have been the players, but Mick Hatton did like an end of year recap, and he mentioned that there's 5 players on roster that are part of national teams. Zimmerman, I know, is one. Vogt, that you mentioned, I think, for Team Germany. Sunderland.
Yep.
Carrico or Ahola, maybe. No, because he's mentioning players that are coming back next year. So I think Carrico, someone else as well. Urela. So those players, part of national teams, and it's Olympic year next year. And those players play on the Olympics. Next year, for the men, you've got the NHL players playing again. So no college players will be participating in the Olympics next year, which will be the first year in 3 Olympics the last 2 Olympics, you've had college players play. And you've had St. Cloud players play in those. Well, Borgen didn't play in those Olympics, but he was selected to the roster. That's a discussion for another day. But for the women, you'll probably be without, well, now with Henderson likely gone from next year's roster. Because again, you can enter the portal. That doesn't mean necessarily that someone's going to pick you up, but I would imagine someone's going to pick up Henderson. But still, you've got a handful of players that are likely going to be out come February or so next year, right down the stretch. I mean, that's going to be a ill-timed departure for some of those players that we just mentioned that have important roles on this team. So a wrinkle that I really hadn't considered. And that doesn't just affect St. Cloud. It affects all the other teams across the NCAA that, those players field rosters for other nations competing in the Olympics. So it's not just going to be a problem for St. Cloud, but perhaps a good problem. That means that you're drawing good talent. But with the heavy international presence for the Huskies, you get these players that we've mentioned that play for these European teams in particular, potential loss. So maybe that's another reason to bring in some more talent via the portal as well. So it's good to see that they're bringing into, there's no stopping as far as the recruiting trail. And we thought we might be done for the incoming class coming in this year, but got the new Finn to the fold. I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce the name yet. I've got to work up to that. Like Urela, I've still got to take a breath before I say that. So give me a little bit of time and I'll be able to be confident to say it on the air. But good to see her join the fold. And excited to see what Adulski does this offseason.
Yep. Sunderland, Urela, and Kariko for Finland, Zimmerman for Switzerland, and Vogt for Germany.
So Henderson was not part of that list then.
Henderson was not part of that list.
So you've got 5 players still on roster then that potentially could be away from the team at a key time next year.
Now, obviously, Sunderland is going to be a big hit there. With JoJo coming back, Kariko probably not as much. Urela did get some time. Vogt, I don't know how much she was
scratched pretty often this year.
Yeah, she was kind of
obviously could change next year, but
yep.
of those players, I think Zimmerman and Sunderland and Urela are probably the ones that you miss the most. As you mentioned, Kariko's great, but you mentioned you've got another ace in the sleeve next year with JoJo. So that softens that loss a little bit.
Yep. And then with Mustadin coming in, she's 20. She did play on the U18s. She won bronze for Finland. So she's in the system. So I don't know if Finland's going to call her number for the Olympics or not, but it's a possibility.
Yeah.
So, questions. We got a couple of questions that were a little bit more, looking into the future. I'm going to hit those just kind of really quick. We'll obviously talk about them a little bit more in depth. Captain picks for next year. Wiley, I think, is going to be kind of the obvious one right there. I can see going with Zinger and maybe Grant Deshawn for the A's, and then maybe Posh for an A. I don't know, but I think Wiley is.
You would go Wiley for C?
Yeah,
I think I'd go with Deshawn for the C.
Yeah,
but you might be right. I mean, we don't really have any hints because all of the letter wearers this year are graduated players. So it's not like Litke wore a letter for multiple years. Spencer Meyer was captain for 3 years. We don't have any, at least players that we think are returning next year. We don't have anyone that's worn a letter. So that would have given us a good hint. So we're going to have a whole new leadership core for next year as far as letter wearers. So yeah, you just got to look at the seniors. That's where you start as far as who you think are going to wear letters. And the ones that you mentioned are good bets. I mean, who else do you have coming back for senior? Ingram? I mean, if he's coming back, and he's going to be a senior. So I guess put him in the bucket of names.
Reiners.
Possible. Reiners, that's a decent one. I could see him.
I don't know. I actually
think he's more of a chance than Wiley, I would say. They might both wear a letter.
So I don't think so at all. I mean, maybe
again, a lot of this goes with character and clubhouse dynamics that don't really show up on the box score. But I will say,
Reiner's,
I think Reiner skates under the radar.
Weekend.
He wasn't the greatest this weekend, but I think generally, he's a pretty good player. He's never going to put up points. He's literally never scored a goal at the NCAA level. But from a defensive standpoint, defensive defenseman, he's typically a guy I don't scream at the TV about. So make of that what you will. But yeah, other current juniors, I think we've listed all of them. I mean, Jack Rogers, but he's still going to be a junior, technically. So he won't be a senior next year. But yeah, we just mentioned, so not a ton of juniors on this year's roster that will be transitioning into seniors. So I think we gave you the candidates. It's a coin. We missed him. He might be. I throw him into the list of candidates, but I don't know. You'll take Wiley as the C. I'll put a Sean. I'll take him as my guess.
Sounds good. And what the heck happened this season? Fart noise. I don't know. I don't know if I'm supposed to create the fart noise, but I guess I could.
You did a couple of, was it last show? You did a fart noise on the show pretty recently. I can't remember in what context, but you did one of those, which is good. I love saying fart noise. Instead of inserting a fart noise, I think saying fart noise is funnier. So I like our tweeter there. Thank you for the question or the comment. I don't think it really even was a question.
For me, what I like to do is song title with parentheses. I like to say parentheses and end parentheses. So I would say, "Oh, I love meatloafs. I would do anything for love parentheses, but I won't do that end parentheses."
Very good.
I get a kick out of that. Way too early expectations for next season. I'm going to say better than this one.
I sure hope.
Yep.
I sure hope. And I said before, I'll defer that until 2 months from now, until I know what's going to happen. If you're going to ask me now, as far as not knowing what the portal is, it's hard to, well, I like to think it's hard to be worse than this, but look at Miami. There is definitely worse.
There's definitely worse.
Yeah, it's going to be, and it depends too on the other teams in the conference to some extent. Like if the league's tougher, like if the league is tougher next year and St. Cloud improves, they could still be 8th place because the rest of the league is also improved as well. I will say I have the hunch that they'll be better, but I would not expect them at this very early point, not even knowing what the final roster will look like. I would not pick them to be an NCAA team coming into next year, which will be the first time since we've rebooted the show 4 years ago that I will not have picked them to make the tournament at the beginning of the year. But again, ask me again in 2 months and I'll have a better idea of my outlook.
Speaking of the portal, who hits it? Do you have?
I would just be the most concerned about drafted players. So that group includes Bernovic, Hall, Gardner, Ralph, Ingram, Clark. I think that's it. I just pick out those guys as we've talked about on the show. I think I might overrate, whereas you don't put as much stock into drafted players in terms of, at least in terms of like assessing recruiting or the effect of recruiting pro prospects, NHL draft picks, in terms of how that translates to success at the college level. I think there was a debate to be had about that, but just from from those players' perspectives, I could see them thinking, I've got an NHL logo next to my name on the roster sheet. Like, Warren Clark screams to me portal, because he's getting benched basically one game every weekend. I feel like he can think, hey, I can at least play every game at any number of programs. That might not mean like a NCHC or a Big Ten or school like that, but he might at least be concerned of, if I ain't cutting regular ice time here on an 8th place team, I might want to find greener pastures. So I'd be the most concerned about those players. What about you?
Yeah, I don't really highly rate that much when it comes to draft picks. I mean, I've seen plenty of draft picks on North Dakota, and they're all mediocre, you know, in seasons past. So, you know, it comes with it a lot of projects, a lot of hype, maybe a little bit, but you know, Bassey was a draft pick. So, you know, you'll just kind of have that, you know, as they are. And when I look at the portal too, I don't look at it just strictly as wins and losses and where you can have success and win a championship. I look at it as, do you feel like you can have personal success here? And do you like the situation that your coaches are putting you in? I think it's a very much indicative of your management or your coaches, and the style that they do and how they treat you and they treat the players. And Larson does really put me at, or I really think of him as a player's coach. So I think he's a straight shooter, and he's going to be honest with his players. And yeah, we might lose some people out to the portal. I mean, it sounded like when Molinar hadn't had the article with Molinar, that was just kind of a straightforward numbers game issue. I don't looking at, you know, the possibility of who you said portaling. I don't think it's a numbers game issue. I do think that, like Warren Clark, I think he is going to get more time this next year. And I think him sitting out a couple of games is good for his development too, that you can kind of see it in a bird's eye view and kind of see the soft spots of the ice from a different angle. And, yeah, so I don't really see I just feel like so many people can be latched on to, nope, we have a down year. It sucks. Burn it all down. It's going to go to hell. And therefore everyone's going to want out because of it. And I think it's just a big overreaction. And then, you know, I say this, and it very well, you know, could be right after the Frozen Four, there's 7-8 players in the portal. I don't know. But, you know, and I don't know how much is going to happen. And I don't think we're going to be losing a lot. There might be a shocker, but like, I don't see Bernovic going. I don't see Ralph going. Clark,
I would be surprised if, those two players go.
Yeah. Ingram is kind of an interesting situation where he wants to get rid of the stink of the season and just wants to, you know, one last try somewhere else. But at the same time, you know, it's easier to said than done to just pick up and leave and in your last year. So it's, and then obviously, you know, possibility of them going pro as well. So, but I think all of them are still in good position to get good amount of ice time if they choose to take it. And if they don't and they fizzle out, you know, I think there's a reason for that. That's probably more on them. And I guess I wouldn't be losing any sleep over it.
I'm trying to refresh my memory because I mentioned Gardner, who is a drafted player, but he transferred last year from Clarkson.
Mm-hmm.
You can only transfer once now without having to sit out.
I don't 100% know. I can't remember if it's once or
I
twice.
think that's the case. And I think like those double dippers were using that 5th year COVID year, which is gone now. So I'm not even sure if Gardner can, not like I feel like he's a threat to portal, but he might be limited in his options to do so. So take with that what you will. But Brnovic and Ralph, I would hate to see them go the most if we're just limiting it again to draft players, which might not be the best way to limit ourselves in this discussion, but certainly would hate to see them leave, and I don't expect them to leave. And yeah, I do think that it's just the uncertainty of the Larson players coach thing that I definitely agree with what you said. We just haven't had a year like this under Larson, we haven't had a year like this in the portal era, which has been exclusively Larson coach teams, where this was a 20-loss, 8th place season. Last year, you were 2 wins away from making the NCAA tournament. This year, that wasn't it wasn't close at all. So that's just my uncertainty of, yes, he might be a player's coach, but rubber hits the road when you've put in a season this poorly. That might force more action than we're used to going out from the portal, because Larson's been very good at retaining like high-end talent. The guys that he's lost over the years have been more role players and secondary pieces. Really haven't had any major losses to the portal. But times are different this year versus those other years that we mentioned. And that's why I am a little uncertain. But yeah, we shall see. And then whatever the end result is, whatever that number is, and if that number includes impact players, that'll give us an idea of either the changing dynamics, or it'll put some more credence either for the case that Larson's a player's coach that guys love playing for, if he's able to minimize the amount of losses in the portal, or it could give evidence to the contrary if there's a big flood of players moving out. Got no inside information. I'm just waiting patiently and intrigued to see what the results are.
I just was kind of looking at who's probably coming and commits and whatnot. Is we have the USHL goaltender Jan Stolstak coming in. He's 20, I believe, playing in the USHL. Right now, 2.39 goals against, 911 save percentage, 25-10 and 0 for Lincoln. Does kind of make me wonder then about Jimmy Gray, Cocaine Bear, as one.
Would that be a big loss in your book?
No. I mean, especially if we've got Posh and
Showstack's coming in, I'm sure.
Yeah, I don't know if a different bathroom amenity is going to fall on his other foot.
We just keep him away from toilets. There's a way that we can do that.
That's plausible, right?
You brought him up, by the way. Dominic Bassi signing this week with the Idaho Steelheads.
Oh, he's going to the coast.
Remind me, is the Idaho Steelheads, are they in the NHL?
They are not.
They're not. So yeah, Dominic Bassi didn't do much with that. What was it? The Blackhawks picked him.
Yeah.
I don't think the Blackhawks were thrilled with his 1-5-1 season with a 343 goals against with god awful St. Lawrence team this year.
Yeah. So, well, this has gone long enough.
These off-season podcasts, I do like the off-season shows because they're a little different. We don't have to recap games, which can get a little dry. Yeah. Week in, week out.
Especially when we lose a lot of them in a row.
They got really dry towards the second half this year. But these portal movements, we've got things to react to. We've got uncertainty. We've got future recruits. We're talking Showstack. I want to put a pin in that and talk about that next week as far as like freshman class coming in. We mentioned Nolan Road, but we've got other prospects come in that we can perhaps go over and see how they fit on the roster and how that might dictate the amount of action that happens in the portal. So yeah, we can do that. There's a lot to preview and a lot to react to, and I like these. I like these shows in the next month or two.
Yeah, exactly. So keep tuned in. I am Weldie at More Clappers, MOAR More Clappers. Andrew, you can find him at.
It's Mosey 4, the number 4 Hobie, and it's at Andrew SCSU HHB. Send me a tweet.
Send a message. And thank you everybody for listening this season. But like Andrew said, we got there's gonna be a lot of movement here coming up over the next couple of weeks, and we'll be here to recap everything. So until next time, go Huskies! Woo!